All right, so I've started cleaning the brewery. First thing is, I fill the mash and brew up with hot water and PBW. And when you get the PBW, just follow the instructions in the back of it. It should be 1 ounce to 2 ounces of PBW for every gallon of water. I go up to the 7-gallon mark, give it about 10 ounces, and that's fine. I like to put this lid on so that I can run the pump and recirculate it. Keeps for even heating. While that I got that going, I set it up for 104. We're now at 94, 140, and we're at 94, heating up. And then I heat up some clean, warm water to flush it out with afterwards. All right, so we cleaned everything yesterday. We don't sanitize these 2 vessels because everything that's in there will be boiled. In here, first step is gonna get your mash water up to strike temperature. Like on the recipe, 168 degrees. I've got it set to 168. We're currently 116. I have 4.5 gallons of water in here. Important to make sure you put your malt pipe, this piece that came with it, put that in there as you're heating up the water. Otherwise, when you put that in, it'll drop the water temperature. This is what I was telling you, my hot liquor tank. This is where we're just heating up the hot water. Just sparge over the top of this. You can do it in a pan on the stove or whatever you gotta do. And once that comes, I'm just preheating. I'll heat this up to a 170 when I'm ready to mash out, but I'm just preheating it right now because our groundwater is like 46 degrees and it's in the high 30s right now. So right now, basically, we're just waiting for this to come up to temp to 168. We're gonna mash at 156. The reason we're taking it to 168 is so that when we add the cold grains, we can account for the temperature loss there. Should come down right around 156, and then we'll hold that for now. So I'm gonna go mash the grains and I'll take a video of that. So we're getting ready to mill the grains now. I have 10 pounds of 2-row here, 3 additional pounds of 2-row that I measured out with my scale. This recipe calls for 13 pounds of 2-row. And then each of these are 8 ounces. I measured them out and just used what I had. This is our caramel 60. If you notice on the malts, you're gonna get, with the 2-row, it's a lot more just kind of clean. It's roasted, but it's not roasted as hard. Whereas with the caramel 60, I don't know if you can see with the light, it's a lot darker. This is the same malt as this. However, it's been roasted a little bit longer, and it's gonna give some sweet, some caramel flavor, and a lot of color to the beer. So after we measured everything out, we wanna get our mill. You're gonna wanna go get a mill like this. They come with a handle and a platform. The handle would attach here. However, if you're lazy, like me, you take the handle off, and then once the handle's off, you can hook it to a drill and let the drill do the work for you. Otherwise, you'll be here for a good 10 minutes, probably turning this crank. So I just hook the drill on like that, set this on top of my bucket that I'm gonna use to hold the grain, the malt. And then I will start out. It doesn't matter what order you dump this in, it's all gonna get mixed together anyways. So we'll start out with the 13 pounds of 2-row and the 1 pound of caramel 60. We'll throw those in. And then you don't want to spin it too fast because you're not trying to make flour. You're just trying to rip the husk off and break that internal seed into about 3 or 4 pieces. So it takes a little bit to get it going. And then I just go a fairly low speed. And that grain will go right down in there. Done. I try not to get it all the way empty because I've had problems with it jamming up then on the first bit that you're trying to mill. So this way I only have that chance of that happening on the first one. Then I'll load it up pretty heavy. Hopefully you can see that to the top so you'll be able to see it come down. So I just looked at the camera. You can see it's to the top, so you'll kind of get an idea now on how it falls through the mill. Getting down there. Alright, we've got all the grain is milled now. So we're going to take the drill off. We'll take the mill off. Shake it a little bit. And then, this is about what you're looking for when you mill your grain. I don't know if you can see, but it's hard to tell here in this video. But the husks are still intact. And the grain has been crushed. You don't want to under crush it because then your efficiency will go down. You won't be able to extract as many sugars out of the grain. And if you over crush it and turn it into flour, those husks are going to act as a filter during the mash process. And if you tear those up, you won't have any filtration, and you can end up with a stuck mash, and that'll cause you a lot of problems down the road. It's all ready to mash in. Temp is at 167. Once it gets to about 166 or so, I like to change the lid out to one with a hole and recirculate so that the water is evenly heated throughout. As soon as that hits 168, I'll cut the pump off, take the lid off. I've got my grains there. We're gonna mash the grains in. You're gonna dump them in. Start by dumping about half of them, then stir. And as you get towards the end, you're gonna have to start stirring more often, a little bit. Put in a little bit, stir, put in a little bit, stir, because you don't want dough balls to form. Dough balls are basically the grains get stuck together and you'll have a clump in there and that'll kill your efficiency. A couple tools you're gonna need. Get a mixing paddle. You can get a plastic one like this for a couple bucks. And then this is the little plastic diffuser I was talking about before, along with a little piece of silicone, it's 3/8. And this will go in and this will spray the water around the grains so that you don't end up blasting a hole through your mash. All right, we're at 168 now. So we're gonna cut the pump off. It's actually came up to 169. We're going to go ahead and set this now for 156 to our mash temperature. So we've got it set for 156 right now. It came up to 169. Run the pump for a minute, get it back down to 168, and then we'll mash it. All right, we got it back down to 168. We're gonna go ahead, we've got the lid off, rotate the sparge arm, get our grains. As I said, we're gonna go in with about half of them and then stir, and then we'll be a little more careful with the second one. We'll come around here so you can see a little better. Make sure you get them in the malt pipe and not around the outside. Not a huge deal if you do, you'll just pump them back through and they'll come down to the malt pipe, but this is where they belong. Alright, so we're in with about half. We'll stir it up, it'll be really watery at this point. It shouldn't have any dough balls. If you do, when it's real watery like this, they will definitely float to the top. So you'll know if you've got them. Your spoon out, and we'll be more careful with this half. Now it's starting to sit on the top. It's wanting to collect and make dough balls, but we will break them all up. Those dough balls are broken. Almost there. Starting to get real thick. It's kind of like making oatmeal at this point. Find it to be real thick on the top, you can always run the pump some water in. That'll help to thin it out, make it a little easier to stir. It's getting real good and thick now. In with the rest. Should be empty. Start stirring this in. Pump a little more water in with it. Break up all the corners. Dough ball there. Go down to the bottom and start pulling up, and that'll encourage, if there is any dough balls, since it's thick now, they may not want to float up. That'll encourage them to come up to the top. Break up any of them. I don't want any dough balls in there because I want to get as much sugar as I can out of this grain. This is going to turn into alcohol and flavor. We don't want to lose either of those. So now we're going to use the little diffuser piece. What I do first is take my lid with the hole, get it rotated around, stick the diffuser piece onto the sparge arm there, and that should sit in there nicely. Now you take your lid and you can see it runs right through. You're going to adjust the flow, because if you have it full speed, that'll be too much and you'll end up pulling all the water off the bottom and it'll just sit on the top of the mash. So you want to adjust the flow with this valve here, kick the pump on, You want somewhat of a slight trickle and let it go. You're gonna wanna mash like this for about an hour to make sure you get a full conversion of all the starches into sugars. I wanted to give you a little better close-up shot of, there's the sparge arm connected to the silicone hose on down, and that's that diffuser, and that's about what you want, just a slight trickle like that. And that's all adjusted through that valve that came with your on the arm of your pump there. So you just want a slight trickle like that. What that's doing is pulling off the bottom, bringing it up to the top, so all that wort is running through those grains, and you're gonna have an even temperature and a better conversion. Another thing you're gonna wanna watch out for, if you've got, I think this thing says it could do up to 16 pounds, and we've got about 14 pounds of grain in there. So that mash, that water will come up to the top and get really close to that diffuser there. So keep an eye on it, and you may have to toggle the pump off and on every now and then, just so that you don't overfill it or get it to back up into that pipe there. So like right here, I'm gonna cut it off for just a little bit. That way, once I cut it off, that'll settle, so we don't end up overfilling the malt pipe there. This is probably my biggest complaint about the mash and boil, is the temp control. So it's got a swing of about 6 degrees. So you see we got our set temp of 156 and we're at 154. This thing will actually go down to 150 before the heating element kicks on again to bring it back up to 156. Some guys say it's not a big deal. I'm trying to get as precise as I can so that I can duplicate the beers, so I can replicate them exactly. What I do to combat this is I'll go in here right now and I'll change my set temp to 160 since we're at 154, and it'll kick that heating element on right now at 154. And once we get up to say 155 for a couple seconds, I'll kick it off. See, we just went down to 153. I'll actually kick the thing off so that we don't overshoot, and that way there's not a big fluctuation. Now you can mash beer anywhere between 148 and 160, so the beer will be fine. But with this beer, I wanted to mash at a little bit higher temperature because I'm looking for something that's more medium to full body on it. I don't want a light, clean, crisp beer. I want it to have a little more malty background to it. So I'll do this. I'll run the pump while it's going, and I'll bring it back up this way. Another thing I forgot to mention is while you're heating your water, or if you're gonna boil in this thing, this 1600 watt switch you want on. So what that is there's 2 heating elements in there. You've got a 1000 watt and a 600 watt. Basically what this is doing, this just controls the 600 watt element. And so since you don't want scorching or anything right now while you're mashing, you want to make sure you turn that off so you're only running one element. Both elements would bring it up to heat a little faster, but you run the risk of scorching the grain on the bottom. So make sure that while you're mashing, you turn that down to the 1000, which is basically just cutting that smaller 600 watt element out. And then once you go to mash out or boil, or like I said, when you're bringing up your strike temperature, it's totally fine to have that on. Just during the mash process, make sure that is off down to 1000. All right, so now we got about 15 minutes left in the mash, and I just wanted to show you. You can see that wort running through there over the diffuser, nice and clear, and that's what you're looking for. You definitely want to make sure it's clear. That means all the grain is in the malt pipe, and what we're pumping out, what we're going to pump into our beer, is nice and clear. It has no grain. That's just the sweet wort that we've extracted from the grain. All right, so our hour mash is up. Now we're going to flip on the 1600 watt switch. We're going to set this to 168 to mash out, and when we get there, we're going to hold it for about 10 minutes. So we're running the 1600 watts, 168, and we'll wait once it gets to 168 and it's holding consistent. When we know that the whole mash is at 168, we'll hold it there for about 10 minutes, and then we will go into sparging. All right, so we've mashed out 168 degrees for 10 minutes. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get ready to sparge, which is washing all the grains. With the water from the hot liquor tank that I have at 170 degrees right now, I'm gonna run my pump through a sparge arm. You'll see in a second. First thing I wanna do is kick this thing up to about 220 degrees to boiling, even though I'm not gonna boil in it. If you are gonna boil in it,
it's a good time to start ramping it up. But it's just gonna keep everything warm because we're gonna have the lid off, we're gonna have the malt pipe up, and we're gonna be rinsing water, we'll be introducing a lot of cold air, especially in the winter here. But even if you were gonna boil it in the summer, this is a good time to ramp it up. It'll just, when you're trying to heat up to boil, it'll save you a little bit of time. So right now, I'm gonna kick this thing up to 220. So we're set at 220. We've got 1600 watts on, so we got both elements firing. We are going to turn the pump off at this point. Take off our diffuser that we've been using to mash with. The last time you'll be using this one through the brew process. You can put the lid away now. Then I have to use a ladder because I'm short and I've got it up on this tall table, but we're actually gonna physically lift the malt pipe up, rotate it, and set it on these 4 little pieces of metal in here that hold it up. So I bring the ladder over, and what this is gonna do is gonna allow all that wort to drain out of that malt. Lift it up. It's pretty heavy. Make sure you got it resting fairly evenly on those 4 posts, which we do now. Now it's going to start to drain. This is where I've got another one of these diffusers, and I've made this little makeshift sparge arm here. What I'm going to do is stick this tubing. It's just a piece of PVC that I've used, and stick the diffuser in the tubing. Once it's through the PVC, pull it down so it's nice and tight in there, and then I actually just use this handle here to hold it in place like that. And this will connect to my pump out. Then I need to get another tube. I will be going out of the hot liquor tank from the bottom, not the whirlpool arm. From there, I'll be going to the pump in. So I'm going out of the hot liquor tank to the pump back up to there. This water here is sitting right at 172. It's like 172, let's say 170. That's what they say you want, this will work. And then I will prime the pump by opening this. Then I get water all through there. I've put a valve on my pump here, on the outlet of my pump to control it. You want to control it on the back side of the pump. And then I'll kick the pump on there, and I'll start sparging over the top here. And we're gonna sparge until we've got the proper amount in here, a little over 7 gallons, and then we'll boil with that. I know it's kind of hard to see what's going on in there because of the steam, but basically you want to keep that water about 1 inch or 2 above the grain bed, because all the wort that we've created from the mashing process is going out of the bottom of the malt pipe, and this is just clean hot water going on the top. We're rinsing the grains to get all the rest of the sugars out of the grains, and that's also going to give us the actual boil volume that we need. So make sure that you don't over or underdo this part. If you go too much, you can actually flood it out of the kettle down there. And if you underdo it, you're going to lose efficiency because you're not going to get the remaining sugars off your grain. All right, so we're approaching our 7.31 gallons. Looks like we're about there. So it only goes to 7 gallons. I just estimate the 7.31 to be at the top of where it says US gallons. So with that, I've got the pump turned off for the sparge. Make sure I close this valve or I'll have a big mess on my hands. Get that out of the way. And it looks like we are there. So now I'll take the malt pipe out completely and take it outside or something because it's going to keep dripping some really sticky, washed out wort. I'll take it outside, throw it on a stump. All right, so now we've got that out. You can see we're about maxed out on this kettle here. I can see a few grains and stuff floating around in there, not too much. You'll have a little bit of that. I'm gonna try to get that out, actually, when I put it over into my, which was my hot liquor tank, which would be my boil kettle, because I can't get this thing hot enough to boil out here in the winter. I'll get my funnel and everything, we'll get back and we'll transfer it over there after drain the rest of the hot water out of there, because I want that kettle empty. So this is a step that probably won't be necessary for you in Southern California. I'm sure you won't have a problem getting this thing up to a boil. I was able to get it all summer, even through the fall. It's just when the winter hit, I wasn't able to do it. But since I'm putting it over there, this is another unnecessary step. I don't even have to do it, but I've got this funnel with a real tight little screen on it. Since I am gonna transfer the wort from the mash and boil to my boil kettle, I figure I'll filter it one time, just to get any kind of grains or stuff that might be left in there. It'll just be less trub left over in the fermenter at the end. So I hook a hose up to the racking arm. I'm going to utilize the pump in the mash and boil, pump it over, run it through this funnel. Make sure your valves are closed if you're going to, anytime you're doing this stuff, because I've made more messes than I like to admit. So you're going to pump it through, and we will take all the wort from the mash and boil and put it in the boil kettle right now. Helps if I open that valve. So we're gonna take our 7.31 gallons and I'm moving them over here. Like I said, you shouldn't have to do this. You wanna be very careful in this process. So right now I'm at about 180 degrees. I'm warming it up to a boil. Obviously I'll get it to a boil faster with a lid on. However, you don't wanna boil with the lid on. And once you get really close to a boil, you get what's called a hot break. And it's gonna be a bunch of foam. And if you don't have this off and you don't start stirring a little bit or doing something with that, it's gonna boil over and you have a huge mess, even on the mash and boil. So I'll do this until about 200 and then I'll start really keeping an eye on it. I haven't had a boil over and I'm not trying to. One of the most important parts about brewing is drinking beer. This is I don't know if you can see how nice and clear this one came out. It's an amber ale I brewed. My dad, about the only beer he likes is amber ale. And I got lucky with this one. I nailed it on the first try. This one is really good. I'll give you this recipe. I definitely think it puts Fat Tire to shame. All right, we're coming up on about 210. Right about 210, I'm gonna show you the hot break that I was talking about. You see, it kind of looks like a real thick foam on the top. We gotta stir that in or we'll have a big mess. So this is the hot break I was talking about. All that foam, looks like we're gonna get away with it, not gonna stir too much, but it's gonna continue to go up. So we do wanna stir it, make sure that we don't have a boil over. All right, so we're gonna stir in the hot break. Starting to get a boil. This foam, we're just gonna stir it in. Some guys take it off. If it gets too out of hand, I'll take it off. If not, it's just proteins, I'll throw it in there. Should help with the head on the beer later, but I will get rid of it if it looks like it's gonna cause me a problem and come over the top. We are starting to reach a rolling boil, as you can see over there. So I'm gonna cut the flame down just a little bit, just to maintain that boil. Foam is coming up thick now. If we weren't stirring right now, this would have boiled over for sure. But if we stir it in, we should be able to keep those proteins and help us have a nice thick head on the beer later and have good head retention. So that way it laces down the glass real good. But since we've reached the boil, our first addition is going to be a ½ ounce of Centennial hops. Going in right now. Not going to really get any flavor off those, mostly just bittering. Oh, here comes the boil over. Shit. Well, this beer is going to be a mess because I have no idea how much hops are in there. We lost a bunch of liquid Shit happens. Now it stinks out here because everything's burning. Told you earlier I never had a boil over. Well, first time with this kettle, and I've just learned to go in really slow with the hops on this one. Son of a bitch. All right, so I'm gonna re-hop it, but a little slower this time. Like I said, this kettle, it's a little more narrow than the last one I had. First time using this one, and I first boil over. But, oh, don't do it again. Appears as I've got to add hops into this kettle very slowly. It figures, never had a boil over. First time trying to make a video, get a boil over. All right, I got 15 minutes left in the boil. This is where on the recipe we're gonna add the Whirlflock tablet. This is, you can use Irish moss, it's the same thing. This is like basically a condensed version. This is gonna help hang on to everything and weigh it down to the bottom during the fermentation. It's gonna grab everything else. It's not gonna add any flavor. It's not gonna change the alcohol or anything. It's just gonna add clarity to the beer. So it's just this little tablet. You can throw it right in. Some guys break it up. I started breaking it just like in half. Throw it in. It'll foam a little bit, but nothing like those hops the last time. So also now, we got I think about 12 minutes left in the boil. Before we add our next hop addition, we're gonna put our wort chiller in. So it's telling you it's a copper coil basically with a couple hoses off. You run the garden hose through it, it's gonna cool it down. We're gonna add this in now because you don't want to put Star San on this to sanitize it. And so since you don't want to do that, we need to sanitize it. We're gonna sanitize it with the boil. So we want to boil this for probably at least 10 minutes. And that's why we're throwing that in there now. Gotta fish it around the thermometer, and then it should just hang onto the edge like that. Just leave the hoses dangling out. And that's gonna sanitize that chiller so that there's no bacteria or anything that can be introduced into the wort prior to fermentation. All right, we got 10 minutes left in the boil, so we're gonna add our last boiling hop addition before we do our Whirlpool addition. This is 0.7 ounces of Cascade going in. We shouldn't have a boil over on this. I'm going in slow anyways, but we've lost a lot of volume, so it shouldn't come over, and it's not. Also, this is where we're gonna add our yeast nutrient. They say half a tablespoon for 5 gallons. I just give a little shake in there. No flavor or anything, just nutrient to help the yeast during fermentation. You will get flavor off those hops. Those won't just bitter. In the last 10 minutes, you're gonna get some IBUs, you're gonna get some bittering and some flavor. All right, so we reached the whole 60-minute boil. We've still got about 6 1/4 gallons in here, so with the boil over, I don't know how much we really lost. I added I redid the addition of hops there, so we'll see what happens. And anything, I think our alcohol content, everything should be about the same. Might be close to the same beer, but I don't know how much hops are in there, so it may end up a little bit bitter this time. We'll see what happens. But with 60 minutes, it's flame out. It literally means just what it says. Turn the flame off. On the mash and boil, you would just go ahead and turn the power off to it. So I've got it flamed out. Our next addition of hops we're gonna do is a Whirlpool to try to get some hop flavors in there without adding any of the IBUs. We're just gonna try to pull the oils out. So once this thing reaches about 190, we'll start looking at doing that. I'll run the pump, we'll recirculate, we'll do the Whirlpool. The chiller has been sanitized in there. As soon as it comes down, I'll put the video back on and we'll get there. All right, so we got it down to 185. I think you can kind of see it spin around the Whirlpool. This is our biggest hop addition. It's like 4 ounces of hops total. Going in heavy with them now. And like I said, we're just getting flavor out of these hops. We're not trying to get any bitterness. They're spinning around, whirlpooling around, they're good. You'll hear them kind of chopping through the pump. You want to have a good pump if you're gonna whirlpool the hops in there. So now you can see we've got the Whirlpool going there. The chiller's in. I've got the chiller running water. That is cooling down the temps. See, right now we are down to, what is this, about 115? We want it to be 68 degrees. That's the optimal temperature for pitching yeast. ale yeast, which obviously this is. So we'll let this run until we get down to close to 70, and then we will start pitching it into the fermenter, which I've got the fermenter here. It's filled with star sand. Shake it up. It just has to have a contact time. It doesn't have to be completely full. Just make sure that you coat the whole thing. So I'll shake it a few times. I'll dump that out. You don't rinse after the star sand. Even if there's a little bit of foam in there, there's no flavor. It won't hurt anything. That is crucial to the brewing process, because at this point we are going to be down well below boiling temps, and we can start introducing bacteria that will kill the whole beer. So we're now reaching our optimal pitching temp of 68. As you can see, we're about 71 coming down to 70. So I'm going to start setting up everything to throw this in the fermenter. So we're down to 68 right now. Close both these valves here. Fermenter, as you can see, is sanitized. Bubbles up on the top. I've got foam everywhere in there. It has been sanitized. So the first thing, I'm going to have liquid in this tube here that I want to get rid of. The easiest way to get rid of that is going to be disconnect there. Yank that down, put that into there. Now, I want to try to get rid of as much of this air in this line as possible to make less of a mess in the end. It's all just wort going in. Trying to clear as much as we can from that line. So we disconnect that. And now we're going to disconnect this line. This is what I was telling you, where I'm just going to splash it in. So now we're going to open that. And we're just going to kind of let it splash in there. And this is going to give us the aeration. Try to scoot this over a little bit so I don't have to sit here and hold it the whole time. You'll see we'll get a lot of foam in there. It's aerating itself. Got another beer, of course. And the valve is open on there. We need to close that. There's going to be a lot of trub matter in there. We whirlpooled. We should have a good hop cone, but we will still get some trub coming over to the fermenter. So as you can tell by the foam, it's been oxygenated. We've got enough air in there. The stone might help. You might get a little more. However, that'll be enough for our yeast to ferment. You can see we've got a cold break where the hop trub is starting to separate. Believe it or not, I know it looks gnarly in there. That beer will be just as clear and a lot lighter than this when it's all said and done. That's why we threw that Irish moss in there, to grab all that crap and drag it to the bottom through fermentation, and all that will be pulled out. Next thing to do is pitch the yeast. I got to get in the basement, and then we'll shoot a video down there. So I'm getting ready to move to the basement, but what I wanted to show you is you can already see the cold break where that the trub, or trub, depends on who you're watching, what they call it, has started to fall to the bottom, and it's leaving clear wort on the top. So during fermentation, this is going to reactivate. Everything's going to spin around again, but all that will end up falling to the bottom, and we'll have nice clean beer on the top. This is full of sanitizer. It's got my bung, my airlock, my yeast, everything. You want to soak your hands in there. This is the point where sanitization is the most important, because you're not going to kill any bacteria anymore other than with the sanitizer. So I'm using the White Labs WLP 001 California Ale yeast, aka known as Chico yeast. It's what Sierra Nevada has been using for years. It's, I don't know, maybe I'm partial because I'm a Sierra Nevada fan, but I think it always makes great beer. I haven't experimented with too many other, I've experimented with other White Labs products, but not too many of the Y yeast products. A lot of people like them, but I found this works for me, so I figured if it's working, why change it? I know you can get different flavors, so I plan to, once I'm brewing on a 10-gallon setup, to do a batch where that I do half with Y yeast and half with this White Labs, to actually be able to tell the difference when I've got two of the exact same worts fermented with different yeast, and I'll be able to tell you then which one I like the most. but right now I don't know. So snip the top off. Pinching yeast is a fancy term for dumping yeast in. That's literally all we're gonna do here. Is just dump the yeast into the fermenter. It's kind of tricky, but get as much out of the package as you can. I've left some in the package and haven't noticed any difference, but I figure if you paid for it, you might as well use it. A little bit of yeast up there on the top, get rid of that. Dump it there, or make a mess later. And next, you've got your bung, which is gonna go in the big hole. Throw that down on there. So this has got a seal in here, it's screwed down on there. The bung is helping make a seal as well. This is your airlock. It's got a fill line on it. Stick that inside the hole in the bung. It'll make a nice seal. And I've filled these multiple ways. I found this to be the best. I just take a spray bottle with my sanitizer, spray it till I get up to the line. That. I use the 3-piece airlock. I don't use the bubbler one. I think the bubbler one is nice. I haven't tried it though because I started using these and they work. They're cheap and I haven't had any issues. So just like the yeast, if it's not broken, I'm not going to change it. You can see the cold break now where the trub has went down to there. That trub will sink down to about there and we'll end up with just a bunch of clear beer. This thing's going to ferment though. And when it does, all that's going to mix back up again. I'll send you some more videos down the road. We ended up with a little less in the fermenter than normal. I think that's due to the boil over. But at the end of the day, we should still end up with pretty close to a full keg. And we'll drink it anyways. So now it's time for a true test. You got your hydrometer tube, hydrometer. Fill this up with about 5 to 6 ounces of liquid out of the fermenter. And what this is going to do is going to tell us how much sugar is in here. 1.000 would be water. A very well fermented beer would be 1.010, 1.011, also known as 1010, 1011. The recipe called for this to be 1.063, which we would call 1063. So we're going to stick this in here. That reading right there may not be accurate, so you want to give it a good spin, and you're going to look. And so it's got alternating colors. This orange is all in the 1050s, and so we are down to 1060. So we know that we are past 1060, and it looks like if you get in there, we're right at about 1062. Maybe 10, did we hit it right on at 1063? Let's see. 10. It's kind of hard to get it perfect. They got better ways to do this, but this is cheap and works for me. I'm gonna say we're right on 1063. Almost 1064. I'm trying to get that in the camera. You can see we got a little bit of that green line showing. That's the 1060 marker. So we have hit it pretty dead nuts on. So that tells me that the amount of sugar in there is the same as it has been in the past when I brewed it, and I really liked it. This one's gonna end up turning out to be a little bit more bitter probably because I don't know how much of the Centennial stayed in after the boil. And so I added just a whole nother dose of it. Regardless, it's not typically too bitter of a pale ale. It's more malt forward, so it should be all right. And that's it for the brew day. One last thing that I forgot to mention. In a clear fermenter like this, if it's stainless steel, it's not a big deal. But in a clear fermenter, you don't want to let any sunlight get to that beer while it's fermenting in there. So I'll move it back a little bit. Down here in the basement, I probably wouldn't get any anyways, but just to be safe, I like to cover it up. Your box that your mash and boil came in is perfect. Cut the lids off, and if you use If you use the same fermenter that I recommended, it slides right over the top, seals it up fine. There's air, it's not going to blow over anything, and it'll keep all the light out. So don't throw away your box.